Deep in ancient forests, strange humans watched our ancestors pass. They were going to change everything we thought we knew. 300,000 years ago, South Africa looked nothing like today. Where dry grasslands stretch now, forests grew thick and green. Where silence fills caves today, water dripped and flowed. The world was different then. Small people lived in those forests. They stood only as tall as a 10-year-old child today. Their heads were tiny, their brains no bigger than an orange. But their hands could have shaken yours. These were the Star People, though they wouldn't get that name for thousands upon thousands of years. The morning mist hung low between the trees. A mother led her children through familiar paths. Her fingers, curved like hooks, gripped branches when the ground grew steep. The children followed, silent as shadows. They knew these forests. Every fruiting tree, every hidden spring, every cave that offered shelter when storms came. The mother stopped. Fresh footprints crossed their path, but these prints were different, longer, deeper, made by people who walked differently. People like us. Our ancestors were already here, already changing the land. They carried sharp stones and spoke in ways the small forest people didn't understand. The mother pulled her children back into deeper forest. Time moves strangely in this story. We need to jump forward, past ice ages and warming periods. Past the rise and fall of countless generations, past the moment when the last star person took their final breath. 300,000 years forward, to a September morning in 2013. Two men were about to find them again. Rick Hunter loved caves the way some people love music. Every weekend he drove out from Johannesburg to explore. The Rising Star cave system had been mapped for decades. Cavers knew it well. They trained there. They tested new equipment in its familiar passages, but caves keep secrets. Even mapped ones. Stephen Tucker squeezed through the entrance that morning with Rick. They'd been here dozens of times. The route was automatic now, left at the first junction straight through Dragon's back chamber, careful on the loose rocks. September 13th, spring in South Africa. Above ground, flowers open to morning sun. Below ground, only headlamp beams pushed back the dark. They'd been underground for 30 minutes when Stephen noticed it. A shadow where no shadow should be. A vertical crack in the chamber wall, barely visible unless you looked at exactly the right angle. Rick. One word was enough. They approach slowly. Cave openings can be deceptive. What looks like a passage might be just a shallow indent. What looks solid might crumble at a touch. Stephen aimed his light down. The crack dropped straight into blackness. "Never seen this before," Rick said, and he'd been caving here for 20 years. The crack measured 18 centimetres at its widest point. That's about 7 inches, the width of a paperback book. Most adults couldn't fit their shoulders through, but Rick and Stephen were experienced cavers. They knew how to make themselves small. Stephen went first. He turned sideways, exhaled completely, and began working his way down. The rock pressed against his chest and back. Every breath had to be shallow. Every movement calculated. Too fast and you get stuck. Too slow and panic creeps in. 12 meters down. That's 4 stories, but vertical, in complete darkness, with the rock pressing from both sides. Stephen's feet found nothing. Then suddenly, space. he dropped into a chamber no modern human had ever seen. His headlamp swept across the floor. Bones, bones everywhere. Not scattered randomly like a predator's leftovers, not piled like flood debris. These bones lay where bodies had been placed, carefully, deliberately. Stephen's breathing echoed off the chamber walls. "Rick," he called up, "you need to see this." Rick descended more slowly. He was older, more cautious. The crack seemed to tighten around him. Halfway down, he had to stop and control his breathing. The rock doesn't actually move, but panic makes it feel like it does. Finally, his feet touched the chamber floor. He stood next to Stephen in silence. Their lights played across femurs and ribs, jawbones and vertebrae, some still articulated, connected as they'd been in life. "Human?" Stephen asked. "Look human," Rick said. But something was wrong. The proportions, the shapes, these weren't quite right. They took photographs with shaking hands. Every angle they could manage. Close-ups of teeth, wide shots of the whole scatter. They touched nothing. Real cavers know better than to disturb a find. The chamber was small. Maybe 15 meters long, never more than 2.5 meters wide. The bones covered most of the floor, layer upon layer, some half buried in orange clay, others sitting on the surface as if placed yesterday. How many bodies were here? Too many to count in the strange shadows of headlamp light. They needed to leave, needed to tell someone, but first they had to climb back up through that crack. Going up was harder than coming down. Gravity works against you. The walls seem tighter. Your muscles tire quickly when you're wedged between rocks, inching upward. Stephen went first again. Push with the legs. Breathe out. Slide up a few inches. Breathe in carefully. Not too deep or you'll wedge tight. Push again. 12 meters becomes eternity when you climb it this way. Both men emerged exhausted, exhilarated and covered in orange cave mud. They sat in the dragon's back chamber, catching their breath. "We need to call Lee Berger," Rick said. Professor Lee Berger had found famous fossils before. He'd discovered Australopithecus sediba in 2008. He understood bones the way Rick understood caves, intimately, instinctively. When Rick's email arrived with the photographs, Lee was sitting in his office at the University of the Witwatersrand. He opened the first image. His coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. The second image made him set the mug down entirely. By the third image, he was already reaching for his phone. "Pedro," he said when his colleague answered, "you need to see something." Pedro Boshoff looked at the images on Lee's computer screen. "Where?" "Rising Star. Rick and Stephen found thee 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks of verification. 3 weeks of checking and rechecking. 3 weeks of keeping the secret while plans formed. "How many individuals?" Lee shook his head. "Can't tell from photos. Could be 3. Could be 30. Pedro leaned closer to the screen. A partial skull stared back. Not human, not quite. But not ape either. Something between. Something unknown. Lee started planning the excavation that night. But he faced a problem no paleoanthropologist had faced before. The bones were real, he was certain of that. The site was incredible. Perhaps the richest fossil site ever found in South Africa. But that crack, that 18-centimetre crack. Lee stood 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. He would never fit. Most of his colleagues wouldn't fit either. The typical archaeologist, the typical fossil expert, too big. The greatest discovery of his career lay just out of reach, unless... The Facebook post went live on October 7th. We need perhaps 3 or 4 individuals with excellent archaeological, paleontological, and excavation skills. That part was normal enough. They must be skinny and preferably small. They must not be claustrophobic. They must be fit, adventurous, and able to work in cramped quarters. That part was not normal at all. Within 10 days, Lee received 60 applications. He needed to choose carefully. These people would be handling priceless fossils in dangerous conditions. One wrong move could destroy irreplaceable evidence, or worse, someone could get hurt. Marina Elliott read the Facebook post in her apartment. She was finishing her PhD in biological anthropology. She was also a caver, 5'4", slender build and completely comfortable in tight spaces. She applied immediately. 2 weeks later, she got the call. "Can you be in South Africa by November 1st? She was already packing as she answered yes. 5 other women received the same call. Becca Peixoto, an archaeologist who'd worked everywhere from Portugal to Indonesia. Lindsay Hunter, who would later marry Rick Hunter, the co-discoverer. Ellen Feuerriegel, flying in from Australia where she studied ancient foot bones. Hannah Morris, quiet and methodical, perfect for the delicate work ahead. Alia Gertoff, whose dissertation on early human teeth would prove invaluable. 6 women, all scientists, all small enough to fit through the crack. They would become the underground astronauts. November 7th, 2013. First day of excavation. Marina stood at the top of the crack, looking down. The other 5 women waited their turn. Below in the darkness lay answers to questions science hadn't even known to ask. "Take your time," Lee said. "Safety first." But Marina could hear the excitement in his voice. Everyone could. She turned sideways, controlled her breathing, and began to descend. The crack grabbed her immediately. Different from normal caving. In a regular cave, you can usually back out if something goes wrong. Here, once you started down, you were committed. The walls scraped her arms even through her coveralls. Her helmet clicked against rock with every movement. Halfway down, she had to stop, not from fear, from wonder. She was doing something no scientist had done before. Entering a tomb sealed for hundreds of thousands of years. The last person here had been one of them, the ancient ones whose bones waited below. Marina's feet found the chamber floor. She stepped carefully aside and called up, "Clear." One by one, the others descended. Becca came next, moving like she'd been born in caves. Then Lindsay, talking herself through each meter. Hannah descended in complete silence. Ellen got stuck briefly at the narrowest point. A moment of controlled panic. Breathe out further, relax the shoulders, let gravity help. She slipped through. Alia came last, her headlamp beam dancing as she descended. 6 women stood as a chamber of bones. Their lights revealed more than Rick and Stephen's photos had shown. Bones emerged from every surface, the floor, the walls where clay had built up. Even tiny alcoves held fragments. "Start with photographs," Marina said. "Document everything before we touch anything." They'd rehearsed this above ground. Every movement planned, every tool accounted for. They had 2 hours before they needed to climb out and rest. 2 hours to begin unravelling a 300,000-year mystery. The first bone Marina lifted was a piece of jaw. Small, delicate. With teeth still embedded, she held something that had once held food, that had once spoken, or tried to speak. Did they have language? Did they name their children? Did they tell stories? She placed it carefully in a padded container. Around her, the others worked in focused silence, each fragment catalogued, each position recorded. Above them, Lee Berger waited at his command station. Lee couldn't fit through the crack, but technology could. They'd run cable down into the chamber, video feeds, communication lines. He watched everything on screens, directed operations like mission control guiding astronauts. Marina, can you pan left? I want to see that cluster. Her camera turned. A hand emerged from the clay, all 5 fingers, still articulated, still in the position they'd held at death. Lee's breath caught. Hands tell stories, how a species lived, what they could make. Whether they were more like us or more like apes, this hand looked human. By the end of the first day, they'd recovered 57 fragments. By the end of the first week, 400. The bones kept coming, layer after layer. Young individuals mixed with the old, males beside females, children next to adults. This wasn't a single death event. These bodies had accumulated over time, years, decades, maybe centuries. Someone had been bringing bodies here, carrying them through the dark caves, lowering them down that impossible crack. Why? The question haunted Lee at night. No animal bones except one owl. No tool marks. No evidence of violence. These people hadn't been killed and dumped. They hadn't fallen in accidentally. The crack was too hidden, too specific. They'd been placed here deliberately, carefully, by others of their kind who understood death, who honoured their dead. But their brains were so small. Hannah found the skull on day 9. Nearly complete, eye socket staring up from the clay. She worked around it for 3 hours, freeing it grain by grain. The others stopped their own work to watch. When she finally lifted it, everyone was silent. This had been a person. Strange by our standards, low forehead, tiny brain case, projecting face, but a person nonetheless. Someone who'd lived and died when our own species was young. Someone whose family had carried them into darkness and laid them down with care. The work was exhausting. 2 hours in the chamber, then the climb out, muscles screaming, lungs burning, then rest while the other team of 3 went down. Marina's hands developed thick calluses from gripping rock. Becca's ribs stayed perpetually bruised from the crack's squeeze. But they kept going. Every bone mattered. Every fragment held information. They were writing history of us, or rewriting it. 3 weeks into excavation, they found the child. Maybe 4 years old at death. Tiny bones scattered but clearly associated. Ellen uncovered the skull, no bigger than a softball. The teeth were just coming in. Adult teeth that would never be used. She thought of her nephew back in Australia. Same age, same size probably. But this child had lived 3,000 centuries ago, had played in forests we can barely imagine, had died for reasons lost to time, and someone had loved them enough to carry them here. Word began to spread in the scientific community. Something big was happening at Rising Star. Lee posted updates on Facebook, carefully vague but tantalizing. Photos of the underground astronauts, hints about the number of fossils. Unprecedented, he wrote. Game-changing. Beyond our wildest dreams. Critics called it grandstanding, publicity-seeking. But down in the chamber, the bones kept emerging. 1,500 fossils by excavation's end, representing at least 15 individuals, the largest collection of a single hominin species ever found in Africa. And they still hadn't excavated the whole chamber. Most of it remained untouched, saved for future seasons. How many more bodies lay beneath the clay? Dozens? Hundreds? A whole population carried into darkness one by one. The last day underground was emotional. The 6 women stood together in the chamber one final time. They'd spent more hours here than anyone, modern or ancient. They knew every curve of the walls, every depression in the floor. "Thank you," Marina said to the bones. It felt right to say it. These ancient people had waited so long to tell their story. 300,000 years of silence. Now, finally, they could speak. But first, the bones needed names. Not individual names. Those were lost forever. A species name. Something to capture who they were. Lee chose Homo Naledi. Homo, human, part of our genus. Naledi, the Sesotho word for star, the star people, found in Rising Star Cave. It was perfect. It was perfect. But the name was just the beginning of the strangeness. Back in Johannesburg, in a warehouse converted to a laboratory, 54 scientists gathered around tables covered with ancient bones. Lee had done something unusual again. Instead of keeping the fossils locked away for years of private study, he'd invited researchers from around the world. Young scientists, old professors, anyone with expertise who could help understand what they'd found. The bones told an impossible story. Look at the skull first, because that's where the confusion started. 5 complete enough to measure, and every measurement said the same troubling thing. These brains were tiny, 460 to 610 cubic centimeters, smaller than a chimpanzee's brain in some cases. The average worked out to 513 cubic centimeters, about the size of a large orange, while you and I carry around 1,300 cubic centimeters of brain, nearly 3 times as much. Scientists had a rule, unspoken but universally believed. Big brains came before complex behavior. Big brains before burial. Big brains before symbolism and meaning. These small-brained creatures had apparently broken that rule, because how else did they end up carefully placed in that deep, dark chamber? Marina Elliott held the skull they called DH1, the type specimen, the official representative of the species, a male, probably, based on the robust features. She turned it slowly under the laboratory lights, while 3 artists sketched, trying to capture what this person would have looked like with flesh on these bones. The skull was like holding history and mystery in your hands simultaneously. Modern human in some ways, anciently primitive in others. The forehead sloped back dramatically, nothing like our high, vertical foreheads. The brow ridge jutted out, though not as severely as in truly ancient human ancestors from 2 million years ago. Behind the face, that tiny brain case that made no sense paired with those human-like teeth. Ah, the teeth. Now there was another puzzle that kept the dental specialists awake at night, examining them under microscopes until their eyes burned. The teeth were small, remarkably small for such an ancient-looking skull. In human evolution, there's usually a pattern. Small brain means big teeth. Big brain means small teeth. It's about energy, about what your body invests in. Homo Naledi had decided to break this rule too, sporting teeth that would look more at home in a modern human mouth than in a primitive skull. But the wear patterns, those told a different story entirely. Ian Towle spent weeks documenting every chip, every scratch, every wear facet on those 1,500 teeth. What he found made him double-check his data, then check again. 44% of the teeth were chipped, not slightly worn, actually chipped, like you'd cracked them on a rock. The back teeth, the molars and premolars showed it worst. Over half of them damaged, many with multiple chips. Whatever these people ate, it was destroying their teeth. Not soft forest fruits, that was certain. Something hard, something gritty. Roots, probably. Tubers dug from the ground with all the soil still clinging. In the dry seasons when fruit disappeared and leaves withered, those underground storage organs kept you alive. If you could find them, if you could dig them up, if your teeth could handle the wear. Modern baboons chip their teeth the same way, grinding through dirt-covered roots when the easy food runs out. About 25% of baboon teeth show chips. Homo naledi's rate was nearly double that. Think about that for a moment. Every meal wearing away at your teeth, knowing that once they're gone, you're done. No dentist 300,000 years ago. No soft foods for the toothless elderly. Your teeth were your survival, and these people were grinding theirs to nothing just to stay alive. The hands told a completely different story, one that made even less sense paired with those primitive skulls. John Hawkes assembled the bones of a complete hand on the laboratory table, working like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle where every piece was worth more than gold. One hand had been found articulated, all the bones still connected, fingers still curled as they'd been at death. The thumb was long, strong, with pronounced muscle attachments that would have made it powerful and precise. The proportions between the palm and fingers matched ours almost exactly. These hands could have made tools, sophisticated ones, could have threaded a needle if needles had existed then, could have painted on cave walls, shaped clay, done anything our hands can do, except, and here's where it gets strange again, the finger bones were curved. Not slightly curved like ours, but dramatically curved like a creature that spent serious time hanging from branches. The juvenile specimens showed less curve than the adults, which meant something extraordinary. Adults climbed more than children did. Usually in primates it's the opposite. Youngsters play in trees while adults stay grounded. But Naledi adults seemed to return to the trees regularly, perhaps when ground predators appeared, perhaps to reach foods others couldn't access. Picture them for a moment. Small figures with human hands and ape fingers, scrambling up a tree trunk faster than you could run, their curved fingers finding holds that straight fingers never could, safe in the branches while below, perhaps, our own ancestors stood frustrated, unable to follow. The shoulder blades sat high on their backs, more like a chimp's position than ours. The clavicles were short, the chest narrow, built for climbing, not for the broad-shouldered throwing stance that would later make humans such deadly hunters. Yet from the waist down, everything changed again. Jeremy De Silva couldn't believe the foot bones when he first saw them. He'd studied fossil feet for 15 years, could tell you the evolutionary history of every tiny bone in the human foot. But these feet shouldn't exist, not attached to the rest of this skeleton. The foot was essentially modern, the big toe aligned with the others instead of sticking out like a thumb. The arch was present and well developed. The proportions between the heel and the forefoot matched ours. These feet were made for walking, for covering long distances efficiently. Laboratory tests confirmed it. The biomechanics were all wrong for a committed tree climber, but perfect for ground travel. The ankle joint, the way the tibia connected, the robustness of the weight-bearing areas. Everything screamed terrestrial biped. So you had an animal with climbing shoulders and arms but walking feet and legs. A creature of two worlds, perfectly adapted to neither but functional in both. The femur, the thigh bone, showed the same contradiction. The shaft was primitive, almost Australopithecine-like at the top. But the knee joint? Modern. The muscle attachments for the gluteus maximus. The big buttock muscle that powers our upright stride. Massive and human-like. They could walk for miles, these little people. Despite standing only 4 feet 9 inches tall on average, weighing maybe 88 pounds soaking wet, they could have kept pace with you on a long hike. Their shorter legs would have taken more steps, but their endurance would have matched yours, unless they decided to climb instead. The pelvis was perhaps the strangest element of all. Primitive in its flaring, in the angle of the iliac blades, more like Lucy, the famous Australopithecus afarensis from 3 million years ago. But the ischium, the sitting bone, that was positioned like ours. Another impossible combination that somehow worked. Lee Berger stood in front of the assembled bones one evening after everyone else had gone home. They'd arranged them anatomically on a table, not from a single individual but a composite, choosing the best preserved example of each bone. In the fluorescent light of the laboratory, 300,000 years collapsed into nothing. This creature shouldn't exist according to everything science thought it knew. Too primitive for its age, too advanced for its brain size, too successful for something that should have gone extinct millions of years earlier. The dating had been another shock that rippled through the paleoanthropological community like an earthquake. When the bones first emerged, everyone assumed they were ancient. 2 million years old, maybe more. That brain size, those primitive features, surely these were early Homo, maybe even the transitional species between Australopithecus and our genus. Paul Dirks spent 2 years dating the site, using every technique available. Uranium-thorium dating on the flowstones that covered some bones. Electron spin resonance on the teeth themselves. Paleomagnetic analysis of the sediments. 6 different laboratories around the world working independently to avoid bias. The results came back. 236,000 to 335,000 years old. Middle Pleistocene. Yesterday, in geological terms. When those dates were published, critics accused them of mistakes, contamination, fraud even. It couldn't be right. At 300,000 years ago, our own species was already emerging in Africa. Homo heidelbergensis, with brains twice the size of Naledi's, had already spread across 3 continents. Neanderthals were evolving in Europe, and in South Africa, these tiny-brained, primitive-bodied people were still around, still surviving, still carrying their dead into caves. The implications made scientists uncomfortable. because it meant rethinking everything about human evolution. We like our evolution linear, apes to primitive humans to advanced humans to us. A ladder of progress with each rung clearly marked. Bigger brains, better tools, more complex behaviour, step by step by step. Homo Naledi shattered that comfortable story. Here was proof that human evolution was more like a river delta than a ladder. Multiple channels flowing simultaneously, sometimes merging, sometimes diverging, some ending in dry sand while others reached the sea. While our ancestors were developing advanced stone tools and maybe even language, Naledi was living alongside them with a brain barely bigger than a chimp's, yet they were human enough to honour their dead, sophisticated enough to navigate pitch-black caves, successful enough to survive for who knows how many hundreds of thousands of years. The ecological niche they occupied must have been unique, something our ancestors couldn't or wouldn't exploit. Those curved fingers suggest dense forests where climbing still mattered. The teeth where patterns point to foods others ignored. Tough, gritty, requiring dedication to process. Chris Stringer at the Natural History Museum in London put it best. They make us reconsider what it means to be human. Because if humanity is about brain size, Naledi wasn't human. If it's about body proportions, they were only partly human. If it's about tool use, well, no tools have been found with them, though their hands could certainly have made them. But if humanity is about something else, about care for the dead, about navigating complex landscapes, about surviving against odds in a changing world, then Naledi was profoundly human. The workshop in Johannesburg continued for weeks, scientists working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and excitement. Every bone revealed new contradictions. The inner ear bones, tiny as rice grains, showed a mixture of primitive and advanced features. The vertebrae suggested a spine curved like ours, but attached to ribs more primitive than expected. Even the way the bones had fossilized was unusual. Some barely mineralized, almost fresh-looking. Others turned to stone. The preservation was so exceptional that under microscopes you could see where beetles had gnawed the bones, where snails had passed over them, leaving their characteristic trails. These weren't bodies thrown into water or covered by volcanic ash. They'd been laid in dry clay and left to time. Marina Elliott made an interesting observation one day, holding a child's femur up to the light. "Look at the muscle attachments," she said to Alia Gurtov. "See how pronounced they are? Even the children were incredibly strong." It made sense when you thought about their world. No soft living for Homo Naledi. Every day would have been physical, climbing for food, walking miles for water, digging for tubers with hands or simple tools. The children who survived to adulthood would have been the strong ones, the capable ones. The bones showed few signs of disease or trauma. One adult mandible had a benign tumour that would have been painful but not fatal. Some of the juveniles showed signs of seasonal stress in their teeth, lines indicating periods when growth slowed, probably during harsh winters or droughts, but no evidence of violence, no cut marks from weapons or tools, no healing fractures from falls or fights. Maybe they were peaceful, these star people, or maybe they just took better care of each other than we usually assume for primitive species. The mystery of how they ended up in the cave remained unsolved and hotly debated. The chamber had no other entrance. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed that. The crack they'd entered through had been the only way in for at least the last 1,000,000 years. No water had ever flooded the chamber. No mud flow had carried the bones there, which meant someone had deliberately carried these bodies through the cave system, navigated the treacherous passages in darkness, and somehow lowered them down that impossible crack. The logistics alone were staggering. An adult Naledi might have weighed 80 pounds. Dead weight is harder to carry than living. The cave passages were difficult enough for experienced cavers with modern equipment. How did Naledi do it with no lights, no ropes, unless they had fire? This was the most controversial suggestion of all. Fire use that early, by such a small-brained species? Most scientists rejected it immediately, but how else? How else did they navigate those caves? Some suggested they had better night vision than us, maybe more like a nocturnal primate. Others proposed they knew the caves so well they could navigate by touch and memory. A few wondered if there had been another entrance, now sealed, though no evidence supported this. The burial debate split the scientific community. Paul Dirks, who'd led much of the geological analysis, was convinced it was deliberate burial. The positioning of the bodies, the accumulation over time, the absence of any other explanation, it all pointed to intentional behaviour. They were putting bodies in that chamber on purpose, he said to conference. Whether you want to call it burial or corpse disposal or something else, it was deliberate. Critics fired back immediately. Aurore Val wrote a scathing response, pointing out that some bones showed evidence of insect damage that suggested the bodies had partially decomposed before entering the chamber. Maybe they died elsewhere and were washed in during rare flood events. Maybe there were multiple entrances over time. Maybe. But standing in that chamber, everyone who'd been there said the same thing. It felt deliberate. It felt like a place of purpose. The Lasidi chamber discovery in 2014 only deepened the mystery. Because now there were two chambers. Two separate death chambers over 100 meters apart, both requiring that same torturous journey through darkness. Rick Hunter had been exploring again when he found it. Last day of the first expedition, actually. Everyone exhausted, ready to go home, and Rick decided to check one more passage. That's how it happens sometimes. The best discoveries come when you're too tired to be careful. This crack was different. Wider at the top but narrowing fast, and the chamber below held only 3 individuals, 2 adults and a child. But one of the adults, they'd call him Neo, meaning gift in Sesotho, was extraordinarily complete. Skull, spine, ribs, pelvis, most of the limbs, as if he'd been laid down carefully and never disturbed. 300,000 years of stillness. Neo's bones would later reveal things the fragmented Dinaledi remains couldn't. How the skull connected to the spine, that delicate architecture that determines how a creature holds its head, where it looks, how it moves through the world. Neo said he walked upright, but probably tilted forward slightly. Not quite our vertical posture, but close. His ribs formed a cone shape, narrow at the top, wider at the bottom. Not barrel-shaped like ours, more like climbing primates, though, again, those legs were made for walking. Everything about these people was contradiction. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We need to talk about their world first, the stage where this strange story played out. South Africa, 300,000 years ago. Not the dry grasslands you might picture, but a mosaic. Forests along the river valleys, dense enough that sunlight barely reached the ground. Open woodlands on the slopes where fever trees grew with their yellow bark that looked like sunlight even in shadow. Grasslands on plateaus where vast herds moved with the seasons, and everywhere rocky outcrops called kopjes, islands of stone rising from the landscape. Caves and crevices honeycombed these formations. Some led nowhere. Others opened into vast underground networks that are still being mapped today. The High Veld, they call this region now. High plateau country, a mile above sea level in places. The air thin enough that newcomers get winded walking upstairs. But Naledi had been here for generations uncounted. Their lungs were adapted, their hearts efficient. Winter mornings could bring frost. Imagine them then, small figures emerging from cave shelters, breath steaming in the cold air. The children would have stayed close to the adults. This wasn't a safe world for wandering. Leopards denned in the same kopjes. Not modern leopards, but their ancestors, just as deadly. Saber-toothed cats still prowled then, though growing rare. Hyenas, not the spotted ones we know, but giant hyenas, heavy as lions, with jaws that could crack elephant bones. Yet the Naledi chamber held no Naledi bones with predator damage, no tooth marks, no evidence of dragging or gnawing. However they died, it wasn't by being eaten. Strange, because everything else died that way then. The fossil record is mostly predator accumulations, bones collected in hyena dens, leopard caches in trees, kill sites where something large fell. But not Naledi. They managed something different. Here's something the teeth tell us that hasn't made it into many scientific papers. These people were right-handed. The wear patterns show it. When you use your teeth as tools, holding something with your left hand and pulling with your right, it leaves distinctive marks. Most Naledi showed this pattern. Same-handedness ratio as modern humans, actually. 9 out of 10 favouring the right. Such a small detail, but it makes them suddenly real, doesn't it? A Naledi mother teaching her child to process tough fibres, showing them how to hold it just so, pull at the right angle. No, use your right hand like this. The same lesson played out in millions of human families across time. They would have known every edible plant in their territory, the underground corms that survived droughts, the seeds that needed roasting to remove toxins, the bark that could fill your stomach when nothing else was available. Modern Hadza people in Tanzania still eat many of the same plants that grew in Naledi's world. Watching them dig for tubers is probably like watching Naledi work. Wooden digging sticks probing for the telltale dried stems, then patient excavation, sometimes 3 feet down to reach the prize. Except the Hadza cook their tubers. Roasted in the coals until soft and sweet. Naledi ate them raw, apparently. All that grit, all that fibre. Those destroyed teeth make sense now. But it also means they could survive where others couldn't. No fire needed, no tools required beyond perhaps a digging stick. Just determination and teeth that could handle abuse. During the wet season, from November through March, life would have been easier. Fruits ripened, leaves stayed tender, insects emerged in countless billions. Termites, caterpillars, beetle larvae, all pure protein if you knew where to look. But the dry season, May through September, that's when the tough foods mattered. That's when those who knew every last edible root survived, and those who didn't ended up in caves, carried by those who remembered them. We need to talk about who else was out there, because Naledi wasn't alone. Our own species, Homo sapiens, was just emerging then. The oldest fossils that are definitely us come from Morocco, 300,000 years ago. From Ethiopia, about the same time. We were new to the world, still figuring out who we were. But we were different from Naledi in every way that mattered for survival. Taller had most early sapiens stood 5.5 to 6 feet. Bigger brains, 3 times Naledi's size. And tools, always tools. By 300,000 years ago, our ancestors were making complex stone points, hafting them to wooden spears, bringing down big game. The two species must have encountered each other. The Highveld isn't that big. Naledi used the rocky outcrops and forests. Sapiens preferred the open grasslands where they could use their throwing ability, their persistence hunting, their social coordination. Did they fight, trade, ignore each other? No evidence of violence between them has been found. No Naledi bones with sapiens spear points embedded. No defensive injuries suggesting warfare. Maybe they just coexisted. Like baboons and humans do today, occupying the same landscape but different niches. Sapiens hunted big game on the grasslands. Naledi gathered plants in the forests. Sapiens made elaborate tools. Naledi perhaps used simple wooden implements that didn't preserve. Sapiens built fires and cooked. Naledi ate raw food and paid the price in worn teeth. 2 different experiments in being human running in parallel. John Hawkes made an interesting observation about their hands that nobody had really considered. "Look," he said, manipulating the reconstructed hand bones. "They could have made stone tools. The grip is perfect for it. The precision, the power, everything you need." "But," Marina Elliott prompted, "but maybe they didn't need to. Maybe their solution was different. Think about it. If you can climb trees that others can't, if you can access foods others ignore, if you can survive on resources nobody else wants, why complicate things? Tools take time to make, time to maintain, time to carry around." Chimpanzees use tools, twigs for termite fishing, stones for nut cracking, but they don't depend on them. They don't carry them from place to place. They make them when needed, use them, discard them. Maybe Naledi was the same. A digging stick when needed, discarded when done. A rock to crack something open, left behind after use. Nothing that would preserve. Nothing that would mark them as tool users in the fossil record. Or maybe, and this is pure speculation, they had tools we haven't imagined. Containers made from gourds or folded leaves, cordage from plant fibers, things that vanish completely after centuries, let alone hundreds of millennia. The lack of stone tools with Naledi fossils drove some archaeologists crazy. In the same time period, in the same region, somebody was making Middle Stone Age tools. Beautiful pointed flakes, carefully shaped, obviously the work of skilled hands. If not Naledi, then who? Had to be sapiens, most said. But sapiens fossils from that time in South Africa are incredibly rare. Naledi fossils are everywhere in that cave. It remains one of the unanswered questions, like so much about them. Winter in the Highveld could be brutal for small-bodied creatures. When the temperature dropped below freezing, when frost turned the grassland silver, every calorie mattered. Modern humans have a neat trick. We shiver to generate heat, burning calories to stay warm. It's wasteful, but effective. Did Naledi shiver? Their muscle attachments suggest they could have, but with their small bodies they would have burned through energy reserves quickly. More likely they huddled. Social thermoregulation, the scientists call it. But really it's just what cold primates do. Pile together, share warmth, survive the night. In the Naledi chamber, some bones were found in associations that suggested bodies placed together, not scattered randomly but grouped. Families, perhaps. Those who lived together, died together, were buried together. The children's bones tell the hardest stories. Growth lines in their teeth showing periodic stress, times when the body slowed development to conserve resources, winter stress, drought stress, but also recovery lines showing better times returned. One child, maybe 8 years old, showed a pattern of illness and recovery repeated 3 times. 3 times sick enough to affect bone growth. 3 times nursed back to health. Someone cared for this child, fed them when they couldn't feed themselves, kept them warm, helped them survive, until they didn't. Until something, we'll never know what, finally took them. And then someone carried that small body through the dark caves and placed it with the others. Lee Berger's team tried to calculate how many bodies might still be in the cave system. They'd excavated about 1 square metre of the Naledi chamber, maybe 20 centimetres deep. Ground-penetrating radar suggested the deposits went down 1.5 metres in places. The chamber floor covered about 30 square metres. Do the math. There could be thousands of individuals down there. Generations of Naledi all brought to the same place, a tradition maintained for centuries. But why there? Why that specific chamber? Marina Elliott had a theory, unprovable, but compelling. Maybe it wasn't about the chamber itself, she suggested one evening. Maybe it was about the journey. The path to the Naledi chamber was treacherous but consistent. It didn't change. In a world where everything else was uncertain, weather, food, predators, this one thing remained constant. The same passages, the same challenges, the same destination, a ritual path, a tradition that connected generations. The body enters the cave through the main entrance, down through Superman's crawl where you have to extend one arm forward, one back, wiggling through. Past Dragon's Back, that sharp ridge of flowstone to climb, to the narrow crack, the final descent. Each journey reinforcing community bonds. We do this together. We've always done this. We'll always do this. Until they didn't. Until something changed. The youngest Naledi fossils date to 236,000 years ago. After that, nothing. They vanish from the fossil record like they never existed. What happened? Climate change is the obvious answer. The world was shifting then, ice ages coming and going, each one reshaping the landscape. The forests Naledi depended on were shrinking, grasslands expanding. Their ecological niche was disappearing. But it probably wasn't that simple. Species don't usually just vanish. They adapt, migrate, or get absorbed into other populations. Some scientists wonder if Naledi genes are still out there, mixed into modern populations. We carry Neanderthal genes, Denisovan genes. Why not Naledi? But DNA doesn't preserve well in hot climates. The Naledi bones have yielded no genetic material despite repeated attempts, so we can't know if they're truly gone or if some echo of them continues in us. There's another possibility, less dramatic but perhaps more likely. They might have simply been outcompeted, not violently, not suddenly, but slowly squeezed out as sapiens' populations grew. Every good foraging spot claimed, every water source defended. Not maliciously, just the inexorable pressure of one successful species expanding. It happens today with endangered species. No single catastrophe, just gradual habitat loss until one day the last individual dies quietly, unnoticed. The last Naledi might have been alone, the final keeper of traditions no one else remembered, or maybe a small group clinging to existence in some remote valley until disease or accident or simple bad luck ended their story. We'll never know. But here's what haunts me about the Naledi story. They almost weren't found at all. That crack Rick and Stephen discovered had been there all along. Thousands of cavers had passed within feet of it. The cave had been mapped, explored, used for training. Nobody noticed. How many other chambers are out there? How many other species? We've explored maybe 1% of the caves in South Africa. Less than that, probably. Each unexplored passage might hold another Dinaledi chamber, another species, another chapter of the human story we haven't read yet. In 2017, Lee Berger's team announced they'd found engravings in the caves, cross-hatched patterns carved into the walls. If Naledi make them, and that's a huge if, it changes everything again. Symbolic behaviour, art, another supposedly unique human trait that wasn't unique after all. The scientific community erupted in controversy. The engravings were real, but who made them? When? Modern humans used these caves too, much later. Could be graffiti from the 1800s. Could be natural weathering that looks artificial. Or could be Naledi, marking their burial chambers, leaving signs we can't read. Paul Dirks found evidence of fire use in the caves too. Charcoal, soot on the ceiling. But again, which species? When? Fire use by small-brained hominins that early would rewrite textbooks. Every answer about Naledi leads to more questions. In the laboratory, work continues. New techniques develop every year. Maybe soon someone will extract DNA. Maybe someone will find stone tools clearly associated with Naledi bones. Maybe another chamber will be discovered with even better preservation. Or maybe we already know the important part, that 300,000 years ago a small-brained species of human honoured their dead. Honoured their dead with a dedication that transcended brain size, tool use, and every other metric we use to measure humanity. Let me take you back to one particular morning, though of course I'm imagining it, piecing together what must have been from bones and teeth and the wear patterns of ancient lives. The female was old by Naledi standards, maybe 40 years, though she looked older. Her teeth were worn to nubs, the right ones worse than the left because that's the side she'd favoured for 30 years of grinding tough fibres. Her curved fingers had thickened with age, calloused from countless climbs, scarred from thorns and sharp stones. She woke in the pre-dawn darkness as she always did, her granddaughter's small body warm against her side. The cave mouth faced east. They always faced east when possible, to catch the first warmth of sunrise. Around them, the rest of the group stirred. 12 individuals, maybe 13. Hard to be sure because the adolescents sometimes wandered between groups, testing their independence. No fire, never fire. That was for the tall ones, the ones with straight fingers who lived out on the grasslands. She'd seen their smoke columns rising in the distance, smelled meat cooking on wind shifts, but her people didn't need fire. Hadn't needed it for all the generations the old stories reached back. Her daughter was already up, checking on the infant who'd been sick for days. Congestion rattling in tiny lungs. In our world, a simple cold. in theirs potentially fatal. The mother held the baby upright against her chest, patting its back gently, trying to clear the airways. The old female knew that particular rattle, had heard it too many times. Some infants recovered, many didn't. The ones who survived their first year were tough, but that first year, half didn't make it. Maybe less. Outside, the world was waking up. Francolins called from the grassland edge, harsh, repetitive cries that meant dawn was coming. A troop of baboons barked somewhere upslope, probably heading for the same fruiting figs the Naledi group had been visiting. Competition would be fierce today. Baboons were bigger, stronger, with those terrifying canine teeth. But Naledi could climb higher, out onto thinner branches where baboons couldn't follow, if they got there first. The old female clicked her tongue softly, their signal to move. Not words exactly, but meaningful sounds. Different clicks for different situations. Sharp double click for danger, soft trill for food found, low rumble for gathering. Every Naledi group had slightly different sounds, like dialects, though they could generally understand each other when groups met. They filed out of the cave in their usual order. Adult males first, scanning for predators, then females with older children. The old female came last with her granddaughter, making sure no one was left behind. The path to the fig trees wound through broken woodland. Fever trees with their photosynthetic bark glowing green-gold in the early light. Leadwood trees so dense their timber would sink in water. Between them, clearings where grass grew tall enough to hide anything. This was the dangerous time. Predators knew the morning routes, the paths to water, to food. A leopard could take a Naledi easily, especially a small one, especially one walking last in line. The old female's eyes never stopped moving. Shadows under bushes, movement in peripheral vision, birds suddenly taking flight. Any of these could mean death approaching on silent paws. Her granddaughter found something. A tortoise, overturned somehow, legs waving helplessly. The child flipped it right side up and watched it lumber away. No thought of eating it. Tortoises were famine food when nothing else remained. The taste was terrible, and they were too much work for too little meat. Besides, the figs were close now. She could smell them, sweet and fermenting where overripe ones had fallen, but the baboons had beaten them there. 40 or 50 baboons filled the trees, stuffing their cheek pouches, dropping more fruit than they ate. The big males displayed when they saw the Naledi group approaching, standing tall, showing those finger-long canines barking threats. The Naledi group stopped at the forest edge, waiting, watching. See, baboons were greedy but impatient. They'd gorge themselves and move on within an hour, following some baboon agenda humans have never quite understood. Naledi could wait, had to wait. Direct confrontation would mean injury or death. The old female settled against a tree trunk, her granddaughter beside her. This was teaching time. She demonstrated how to strip bark from a young shoot to reach the edible inner layer. Not filling, but it kept hunger at bay. The child tried to copy her, fumbling with unpracticed fingers. Other group members dispersed slightly, finding things to nibble while waiting. Grass seeds, flower petals, a lucky find of beetle larvae under loose bark. One of the young males had been experimenting lately with rocks, not making tools exactly, just playing. Banging stones together to see what happened. Sometimes they broke in interesting ways. Sometimes they made sparks, tiny flashes that fascinated him though he didn't understand them. If he'd been born into a sapiens group, he'd have been taught to nap properly, to strike at just the right angle to remove predictable flakes, to shape those flakes into points and scrapers. But here, among Naledi, his banging was just noise, annoying noise. His mother cuffed him gently when he got too loud. The baboons were finally moving off, heading toward water. The Naledi group approached the fig trees cautiously. Baboons sometimes left sentinels, adolescents who'd scream if competitors arrived, calling the troop back. But not today. Today the trees were theirs. The old female climbed slowly but surely. Her curved fingers found holds automatically. Muscle memory from 40 years of climbing. Up into the canopy where the ripest figs clustered. Her granddaughter followed, mimicking every hand placement. Learning. Figs are perfect primate food. Soft enough for worn teeth. Sweet enough for quick energy. Full of tiny seeds that pass through undigested, ensuring more fig trees later. The old female ate steadily but carefully. Too many too fast meant stomach cramps. Below a commotion. One of the adolescent males had ventured too far along a thin branch. It snapped. He fell maybe 4 meters, landing hard but not catastrophically. Embarrassed more than hurt. The others made soft huffing sounds, laughter essentially. The old female watched him carefully as he climbed back up, favouring his left wrist, probably sprained. In their world, a sprained wrist could mean starvation if it didn't heal quickly. Can't climb properly, can't dig effectively, can't contribute. But Naledi took care of each other. She'd seen it countless times. The injured were fed by others. The sick were helped to water. The old, like herself, were valued for their knowledge even when their bodies failed. Not like the tall ones. She'd once watched a sapiens group abandon an elderly woman who couldn't keep up with their constant migrations. Just left her sitting by a termite mound, calling after them. Naledi would never do that. Never had, as far as the stories told. By midday, the heat was oppressive. The group descended from the figs and moved toward water, a spring-fed pool in a limestone depression. Dangerous place. Everything came here, but necessary. They approached carefully, scanning for crocodiles. The big ones were gone from this area, hunted out by the tall ones with their spears, but small ones could still take a child. The old female drank first, establishing safety. The water was good, clear, cold from its underground journey. She let her granddaughter drink next, keeping watch. Something moved in the reeds. Everyone froze. A bushbuck emerged, saw them, bounded away. Hearts slowed again. After drinking, they foraged the pool's margins. Cattail roots grew here, starchy and filling once you stripped away the fibrous outer layers. The processing was tedious. Peel, scrape, peel again, but the calories were worth it. This is what wore their teeth down, this constant grinding of gritty, fibrous plants. The old female's worn teeth could barely manage it anymore. Her daughter helped, pre-chewing some roots until they were soft enough for the old female to swallow. No judgment in it. Just family caring for family. Someday the daughter would be old, her teeth worn, and her children would do the same. A sound made them all look up. Voices, but not Naledi voices. The tall ones were coming. 3 sapiens hunters appeared through the trees, carrying antelope over their shoulders. Fresh kill. they stopped when they saw the Naledi group, as surprised as the Naledi were. For a moment nobody moved. The old female had seen this before. These encounters happened sometimes. Usually both groups just moved apart, pretending they hadn't seen each other. But sometimes one of the sapiens hunters said something to the others. They laughed, a harsh sound not like Naledi huffing. He picked up a stone and threw it, not to hit, just to make them run. The Naledi group retreated immediately, no shame in it. The tall ones were dangerous as they wanted to be. Those spears weren't just for antelope. But as they climbed into the trees, the old female looked back. One of the sapiens hunters wasn't laughing. A young one, barely adult. He was looking at her with something like curiosity, like recognition. Did he see what she saw? That they weren't so different. That under the size difference, the tool use, the hunting versus gathering, they were all just trying to survive. Probably not, but for a moment their eyes met across the gulf of species, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just acknowledgement. We see you. You see us. We're both here. Then the moment broke. The sapiens moved on with their kill. The Naledi group travelled deeper into the forest where the tall ones rarely went. Evening brought them to a grove of marula trees. The fruits were just beginning to ripen, still too astringent to eat, but in a week they'd be perfect. The old female marked the location in her mental map. They'd need to return before the elephants found them. Yes, elephants. Not the giants of today, but their ancestors, just as impressive. A herd had passed through recently. Fresh dung piles everywhere, trees stripped of bark at elephant reach height. The Naledi group investigated the dung carefully. Elephants didn't digest well. Unbroken seeds, partially processed leaves, sometimes whole fruits passed through. Disgusting to us. But calories were calories. The adolescent male with the rock obsession found something else in the elephant path. A piece of ochre, the red iron oxide stone that left marks on whatever it touched. He dragged it across a boulder experimentally, leaving a rusty line. In a sapiens group, this would have been encouraged. They were already using ochre for something. Body painting maybe, or marking objects. But here, among Naledi, it was just another of his odd behaviours. His mother took it away when he started marking himself with it. As darkness approached, they headed for tonight's shelter. A different cave, smaller than their home base, but safer being unknown. The old female knew dozens of such places, a network of refugees across their territory. This one required climbing a near-vertical cliff face. Hard for the old female now. Her strength was fading. Each hand-hold required more effort. Halfway up she had to stop, breathing hard. Her daughter climbed back down to help, offering an arm for support. Together they made it, the granddaughter watching from above, learning this too, that the old were helped, not abandoned. Inside the cave, they settled for sleep, no fire to extend the day. When darkness came, they slept. The infant's breathing was worse, each breath a struggle. The mother held it upright all night, wouldn't let anyone else take a turn. The old female dozed fitfully, waking often to check on them. She knew how this would likely end, had seen it too many times. Tomorrow, maybe the day after, the infant would stop breathing. The mother would carry the small body for days, unable to accept the loss. And then, when acceptance finally came, they would make the journey. The dark journey to the Chamber of Bones. She'd made that journey 17 times in her life. For her own infants who didn't survive. For her father when an infected wound finally took him. For group members who died from falls, disease, old age. Each time the ritual was the same. The body wrapped in grass if they could find enough. The group moving together through familiar caves. The dangerous descent through the crack. The careful placement with the others. No words were said. They didn't have words as we understand them. But there was meaning in it. Continuity. The dead joining the dead. All together, safe from scavengers and the randomness of decay. Soon, she knew, someone would make that journey for her. Her teeth could barely process food anymore. Her climbing grew worse each day. One fall, one illness, one harsh winter, and she'd be done. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight she listened to her family breathing around her, felt her granddaughter's small hand grip hers in sleep, heard the infant's laboured but continuing breaths. Outside, a leopard coughed in the distance. Baboons shrieked alarm calls. The night hunters were active, but in here, in this small cave, they were safe. The moon rose late, sending silver light through the cave entrance. In that light, the Naledi group looked almost human. The sleeping postures, the way they touched each other for comfort. The mother still upright, still holding her sick infant, still hoping. They were human, really. Just a different kind than us. A kind that didn't conquer the world, but found a way to live in it for hundreds of thousands of years. A kind that didn't need big brains to care for each other. A kind that discovered death was important enough to ritualize when our ancestors were just beginning to be us. The old female shifted in her sleep, pulling her granddaughter closer. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, finding food with worn teeth, competing with baboons, avoiding predators, watching the infant struggle. But tomorrow would also bring figs ripening in sunlight, cool water from limestone springs, the satisfaction of knowing every tree, every path, every safe place in their territory. It would bring one more day of being Naledi. One more day of being Naledi, though she didn't know it would be one of the last. The infant died just before dawn, quietly, the way exhausted things sometimes do. The mother knew immediately, that subtle change from sleeping breath to no breath at all. She held the small body tighter, as if pressure could restart those tiny lungs. Nobody spoke when they woke. What was there to say that their eyes didn't already communicate? The grandmother touched her daughter's shoulder gently. The gesture meant everything. I know. I've been here. I'll help you through this. For 3 days the mother carried her dead infant. Through morning foraging and evening shelters, the body stiffening, then relaxing, beginning its return to elements. The others pretended not to notice the smell. Death was part of life. Grief took its own time. On the 4th morning the mother made a soft keening sound. The signal had been given. They would go to the bones. That journey, I wish I could truly show it to you. Not the physical path, though, that was remarkable enough, but the weight of tradition in every step. Hundreds of generations had made this walk, each group adding their dead to the chamber, layer upon layer, century after century. The old female led them, though her worn teeth and thinning bones said this might be her last time guiding anyone anywhere. She knew every handhold in the dragon's back passage, every place where the ceiling dropped too low and you had to crawl, every turn that looked like a dead end but wasn't if you squeezed through just right. No light except what filtered from distant openings, growing dimmer with each turn. By the time they reached the crack, darkness was absolute. How did they navigate? Memory, partly. Touch and sound. The echo of breathing that told you when spaces opened or constricted. The temperature changes where passages connected. Maybe their night vision was better than ours. Their eyes were slightly different. The orbital shapes suggesting larger eyeballs that might have gathered more light. Or maybe there's something we haven't discovered yet. Evidence of fire that hasn't been found. Some phosphorescent fungus that grew in the caves then but doesn't now. We assume darkness because we can't imagine navigating without light, but they did it, somehow. The crack was worse than the old female remembered. Tighter, or maybe she was just older, less flexible. She had to stop halfway down, wedged between stone walls, heart hammering with more than exertion. This could be it. Stuck here, dying here, becoming a different kind of fossil than the ones below. But her daughter was above, waiting. Her granddaughter would need guidance. The group depended on her knowledge. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to relax muscles that wanted to panic. The stone wasn't actually closing in. Fear was the enemy here, not rock. Inch by inch, she descended. The chamber had its own presence, built from centuries of grief and reverence. You could feel it even in absolute darkness, that sense of accumulated meaning. How many bodies lay here? How many stories ended in this precise spot? The mother laid her infant among the others with movements that seemed rehearsed, though she'd never done this before. Some behaviours run deeper than learning. The placement mattered, not randomly discarded, but positioned with intent. Head toward the chamber's deep end, arms folded or extended based on some logic we can't recover. They stayed for how long? Time moves differently in caves, in darkness, in grief. Long enough for acceptance, long enough for the transition from carrying the dead to leaving them, then the terrible climb back up. The old female almost didn't make it. Her strength gave out 3 meters from the top. For a moment she hung there, neither climbing nor falling, suspended between the chamber of death below and the world of living above. Her daughter's hand found hers in the darkness, pulled. Others pushed from below. Together they got her through, but she knew, they all knew, she wouldn't make this journey again. Back in daylight, nobody talked about what they'd seen, what they'd done. Some things existed outside their simple communications, but the mother walked differently now, straighter. The infant was with the ancestors. The tradition had been maintained. Life continued because it had to. Except life was getting harder for Naledi, though they couldn't have known they were among the last. The climate was shifting again, not dramatically, no ice age this time, but enough. The forests were pulling back. Open grassland expanded every decade. The tall ones with their spears and fire claimed more territory each generation. Where once Naledi groups met and mingled at seasonal gatherings, now months passed without seeing others of their kind. Genetic bottlenecks formed. Island populations too small to sustain themselves. The old female died that winter, not dramatically. Her worn teeth finally couldn't process enough calories. She grew thin, then thinner. One morning she didn't wake up. They carried her to the chamber, of course. That tradition held until the very end. But the group that carried her was smaller than it should have been. Only 8 individuals now. No pregnancies, no children except the grandmother's granddaughter, now approaching adolescence. When spring came, they couldn't find the marula grove. Elephants had pushed through, following some elephantine purpose, and destroyed the trees. The fig trees produced poorly that year, some fungus or disease. The termite mounds they'd harvested for generations were abandoned. The colonies moved to who knows where. Adaptation had always been Naledi's strength. But what do you adapt to when your whole world is changing? They tried following the tall ones, scavenging what they left. But sapiens were efficient hunters, leaving little, and they didn't tolerate followers. Stones thrown became spears thrown, warning became violence. The group found others of their kind that autumn, a miracle really. Another small group, also struggling. Together they were almost viable. 15 individuals. Enough genetic diversity maybe. Enough hands to forage, enough eyes to watch for predators. But winter came early and harsh. The caves that had sheltered them for millennia became traps when food ran out. You can't eat stone, can't survive on tradition alone. One by one, they weakened. We don't know how the last Naledi died. There's no final skeleton dramatically positioned to tell us. They just fade from the record. Here one layer, gone the next. Maybe disease took the last group. Maybe starvation. Maybe they were absorbed into sapiens populations through interbreeding, though if so, we haven't found the genetic evidence yet. Or maybe the last one died alone, as species sometimes do. An old female, perhaps, the last keeper of the old ways, still checking the fruiting trees that no longer fruited, still visiting water sources now claimed by others, still remembering the path to the chamber of bones though there was no one left to carry her there. She would have known she was the last. Animals know these things, the absence of their own kind's smell, the silence where there should be familiar calls, the crushing solitude of being the only one who remembered the old sounds, the old paths, the old ways. Did she try to find others? Walk to the edges of the territory and beyond looking for signs? Or did she just continue the daily routines, foraging, sheltering, surviving, until she couldn't anymore? I think about her sometimes, this hypothetical last Naledi. Wonder if she stood at the entrance to the bone chamber one final time, knowing the tradition would die with her. 300,000 years of continuity about to end. But maybe that's too human a thought. Maybe she just lived until she didn't, without the existential weight we'd attach to it. Either way, they were gone by 200,000 years ago. The world moved on. Our ancestors spread across Africa, then beyond. The caves filled with sediment. The bones waited through the rise of agriculture, the building of pyramids. Greek philosophy and Roman engineering, the Dark Ages and Renaissance, Industrial Revolution, 2 world wars, the Space Age. Until that September morning in 2013 when Rick Hunter noticed a shadow where no shadow should be, and suddenly they weren't forgotten anymore. What does it mean? The Naledi story. Why does it matter that these small-brained ancient humans honoured their dead? Lee Berger says it changes everything, that we need to reconsider what makes us human. If a brain the size of an orange can navigate complex landscapes, maintain traditions, care for the injured, honour the dead, then maybe consciousness isn't about brain size at all. Maybe it's about connection, community, the networks we build between individuals that become greater than any single mind. Naledi's brain was small, but their social world was rich. They knew every member of their group intimately, knew their strengths, weaknesses, preferences, knew who could find water in drought, who could spot predators first, who needed help and who could provide it. Is that so different from us? We have bigger brains, yes, complex language, technology that would seem like magic to them. But strip all that away and what remains? Social creatures who care for each other, who grieve their dead, who try to make meaning from existence. The Chamber of Bones wasn't just about disposing of bodies, it was about maintaining connection. The dead weren't gone, they were gathered, waiting, still part of the community in some essential way. Every human culture has some version of this. Graveyards, crypts, memorial walls, places where we gather our dead and remember. Naledi did it first, or at least earliest that we've found. With their tiny brains and curved fingers, their destroyed teeth and their impossible survival, they looked at death and said, "This matters. These people matter. We'll remember." And in a way, we have. 300,000 years later, we pulled them from the darkness and gave them back their story. Not the individual stories, those are gone forever, but the collective story, the species story. They were here. They mattered. They were human in every way that counts. Sometimes I dream about them. Not scientifically accurate dreams. Those would be boring. But wandering dreams where I follow them through their days. Watch the old female teaching her granddaughter which roots grow where. See the mother pre-chewing food for the toothless elder. Observe the adolescent male banging rocks together, almost discovering something important but not quite. In the dreams, they're not strange. The small brains, the curved fingers, the mosaic of features, none of that matters. They're just people living their lives, dealing with sick infants and worn teeth, finding figs and avoiding leopards, carrying their dead through darkness because that's what you do. They failed, if success means surviving to the present, but they succeeded for hundreds of thousands of years before failing. How many species can say that? How many experiments in consciousness lasted that long? We've been anatomically modern for 300,000 years. Naledi lasted at least that long, possibly much longer. Who's to say we'll match their record? Climate change, resource depletion, the same pressures that ended them are building for us. Will we adapt better? Our big brains haven't stopped us from creating the crisis. Maybe they'll help us solve it. Maybe not. But if we don't, if we go the way of Naledi, I hope someone finds us, pulls our bones from whatever sediment covers them, gives us a name, tells our story, and wonders, as we wonder about Naledi, what it was like to be us. The circle closes here, in the quiet moments before sleep. You've travelled 300,000 years tonight, stood with the grandmother as she taught her granddaughter to process fibres, watched Marina Elliott lift that first precious jawbone, felt the weight of tradition as bodies were carried through darkness. They're all gone now, the Naledi, every one of them. The old female with her worn teeth, the mother who lost her infant, the adolescent banging rocks together, the children who climbed so fearlessly, all gone, except they're not. Not really. They're in the Evolutionary Studies Institute in Johannesburg, catalogued and studied, in museums around the world where replicas of their bones teach new generations, in the scientific papers that describe them, the art that recreates them, the stories told about them. And now they're in your mind too. Another chamber of bones, built from memory instead of stone. Tomorrow the sun will rise as it did for them. You'll wake, as they did, and face whatever the day brings. But maybe you'll remember the small people with their small brains and their enormous humanity. Remember that consciousness comes in forms we don't expect. That care transcends cranial capacity. That being human is older and stranger and more various than we knew. The stars that gave Naledi their name still shine above South Africa. The Rising Star cave system still holds its secrets. Thousands of bones yet uncovered, stories yet untold. Somewhere in those dark passages more chambers wait to be discovered. But for now, rest. Let the story settle into your bones like ancient sediment. Dream of small figures moving through dawn forests, of hands reaching through darkness to help, of traditions maintained against impossible odds. Dream of the star people, who remind us that humanity isn't about conquest or complexity or cranial capacity. It's about connection, community. The courage to carry each other through darkness, even when we don't know what waits at the bottom of the crack, even when we can't see the way forward, even when we're the last ones who remember the path. They did it for 300,000 years. We're still learning how. Sleep now and dream of ancient mornings when the world was different but hearts were the same. Dream of the star people waiting in their chamber, patient as stone, waiting to teach us what it means to be human.